Hey all, thanks for watching. I want to talk about an active storm track through the Midwest, especially near the end of this week, kind of Thursday, Friday, even into Saturday. It's going to be impacting, I think, some travel, a little bit of snow, mostly rain and storms, really more so through the Mid-South. We'll look at the SPC. And then looking at something of a pattern change. We've been talking about this since the beginning of January, and the new year coming near the end of the month. We're starting to see hints of that even at the end of next week. So we'll talk about some of the drivers there. And then I want to finish the video kind of similar to Eric did, maybe piggybacking off of the analog discussion he did, drilling into some of the individual years in the analog package that Eric pulled up yesterday that might give us some insights on where we're going this year in the 2026 growing season, and stumbled across some interesting things there. So if you wait till the end, you'll see some of that. Starting out this morning, just looking at the all hazards map from NOAA, we can see starting all the way over on the West Coast, the winter storm warnings finally for the Cascades, both all the way up through Washington, then through Oregon as well. This has been an area, particularly in Oregon, the Cascade and the volcanic range there hasn't seen as much snow as maybe some other areas across the western U.S. So finally getting in on some of that heavier snowfall there for areas that have been missing out across the West. Also see some of that beige mustard color. One here in the high plains near Wyoming, Cheyenne, that area. Some stronger winds moving through here this morning. If we jump over and just look at those surface winds, that load, see those winds coming off the higher elevation, screaming through the gaps here, producing some of those high winds and the high wind warning as a result, but also through Southern California. You can see those wind advisories and that high wind watch for the potential for a Santa Ana wind event and a mountain wind event as this low south of California sneaks up through Arizona and then finally ultimately out into the Midwest. Behind it, we're going to see some high winds in California, so we'll have to talk about that. Some winter weather advisories kind of scattered about the Rockies here, winter storm warnings in the elevations of New Mexico. And then between our two lows, so this morning we have disturbances moving through the northwest, prompting those winter storm warnings. We have a low pressure system south of California, low way over here kind of exiting off the east coast, prompting the kind of current winter weather advisories and winter weather that's ongoing across New England. But fog advisories in between, kind of in the calmer part of the country, not uncommon in winter to see just wide areas of fog here on these January mornings, and seeing that there in that kind of gray color there. I mentioned those two lows. We can see one here off the coast of California. We can see actually a third one that I didn't really mention way up here near coastal Canada. That's helping to bring some precipitation and moisture over the northwest. And then right here over Cape Cod, that third low, bringing in the winter weather precipitation here this morning over New England. If we jump over and look at radar, not very busy this morning for January, but we can see that low pressure system spinning near Massachusetts. Some snow and mixed precipitation on the back side of this. It's kind of hard to see, where that rain snow line is on here. So always jumping over to the trusted Google Maps to see if there's any kind of interstate slowdowns. And we can see in New Hampshire, some elevation as you go further west, but likely that rain snow line, I would think somewhere in here. This is just kind of the Boston metro. It's about 7 a.m. Eastern time at the recording of this. So guessing that's slowing down the traffic, but maybe the rain snow line, kind of something like this prompting more winter weather concerns further north, but not one of these kind of big New England metro snow events here this morning, thankfully. But double back really quick and see some of that rainfall just off coastal California here, some of this moving into Arizona. We'll look at the precipitation forecast in just a second. You can see some light scattered showers moving through the northwest this morning. Relatively calm, but I mentioned that active storm track. This is the corridor that we're going to be watching over the next 7 days. And usually I kind of step you through all of that before showing you any of the precipitation totals here. But I thought, let's just set it up. Let's look at what we're dealing with here over the next 7 days. This is the ECMWF 7-day precip anomaly. And it's this corridor all the way through the middle part of the country, including Arizona, New Mexico, into the Central Plains, the Midwest, the Upper Midwest, looking at potential for snow. And this corridor here, maybe even Chicago and Detroit, we'll look at that potential in just a second. And then a second piece of this coming through the Mid-South and then up and through New England as we go through the next 7 days. Now, kind of critically, if you look at California, they've been so busy as we went through December, even parts of early January, talking about the high wind warnings even here this morning weather-wise, but precip-wise, finally starting to calm down there across California. So seeing a bit of a break from the precipitation after their quick start to the water year. I want to jump over and show the 500 millibar vorticity map. So this is showing those shortwave troughs responsible for each one of these low pressure systems. So we're looking up in the mid levels of the atmosphere, particularly spin at the mid levels of the atmosphere drives a lot of these low pressure systems as they move through the continental U.S. So this morning, I think this valid about 6 a.m. the recording of this video, we can identify those 3 lows that I mentioned earlier. One south of California, one off the east coast of Massachusetts, and the surface low often forms just to the east or downstream of these individual shortwave troughs. And then finally, I mentioned that coastal Canada one. Well, there's that surface low, maybe somewhere in here. And there's that upper level vorticity maximum, or that shortwave trough as we call it. Now, as I play this forecast forward, see the system diving down in the Pacific Northwest. That's prompting those winter storm warnings, the winter weather advisories across the interior Rockies. We see that coastal system near California coming on shore, Arizona and New Mexico, prompting some of the winter storm warnings there. This East Coast storm now exiting well out of our area by Thursday. As I take this forecast in through Wednesday night into Thursday morning, you'll see the shortwave ejecting out into the southern plains. That's going to be relevant for some severe weather potential this evening. And then by tomorrow afternoon, it's racing up here through Iowa, Illinois, into Wisconsin. And that back system now diving through California into Arizona and New Mexico. And I can tell you that that orientation, where these shortwave troughs kind of dive down the spine of the Sierras like this, is a recipe potentially for some Santa Ana winds in this corridor here. That offshore flow running over the mountains, diving down toward the coastal areas, pushing that dry air and those strong wind gusts, prompting a fire risk. Now, I'm not as worried about that fire risk this year because, well, we've had so much rainfall in Southern California, so we don't have the same kind of dry foliage that we had maybe in the beginning, obviously, of January 2025. Now, that low remains relevant because as that first, sometimes we call this like a kicker wave, comes through the Midwest on Thursday, this low is going to spin off in Texas by Friday and try to merge with this deeper trough coming down out of Canada by midday Saturday before ultimately pushing east through New England on Sunday. And all of these systems kind of get out of our hair by Sunday to Monday, prompting a pretty quiet early next week. Now, I'll have a longer discussion in just a few slides on where we're going at maybe the end of next week, but you can just tell, I'm taking us through the Wednesday. We really don't get out until like Wednesday to Thursday of next week before we get more of those short waves and more inclement weather to talk about. So by like Sunday, as this system clears the continental U.S. all the way Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you can see relatively calm across much of the continental U.S. with a ridge developing over California. That's prompting this drier forecast that we just looked at there. Now, putting this all together in the ECMWF precipitation chart, let's play this forecast forward. Here's this morning, those showers and the snow showers at elevation that we saw this morning. Make this valid like 6 a.m. We'll make it all the way till noon. Lingering showers in New England here through this morning and lunchtime. Most of the precipitation on that Southern California low is offshore, or if not in Mexico, even through like lunchtime. You'll see that coming on shore this evening in Arizona and New Mexico, some snow. The upper elevations there, more snow overspreading the Pacific Northwest and the Cascades, with rain at lower elevations through like the Willamette Valley and through Seattle, Tacoma here this evening on Wednesday. And then tonight, as that low ejects, this is now Thursday lunchtime, but if I make it Thursday about 6 a.m., that low developing somewhere near the Oklahoma Panhandle, potentially some overnight storms in this corridor here. That races up through the day on Thursday. This is now Thursday dinner time. Near the Quad Cities is that low pressure system, more widespread rainfall. And what we have to remember here is the soils here have been thawing out. I mean, my backyard here in Illinois don't have that same frozen ground. So this water is going to be able to penetrate that soil, give us a nice dose of kind of midwinter moisture across a wide area of the Corn Belt here. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, given how dry we are in the subsoil from that fall drought. And then that peels away on Friday. That's that initial system leaving this front here. And you'll notice on Friday, we're still kind of waiting on this next system, with snow now developing on the backside in the Oklahoma Panhandle, high plains of Texas, that we still have kind of some strong precipitation returns here. These are actually thunderstorms that are forecast for Friday afternoon as we wait for this backside vorticity maximum to develop. And if I jump you back just a slide ago, what we're actually watching here, it's very subtle, but when you have kind of a source of moisture out of the Gulf, while that first system on Thursday into Friday morning kind of races off up into Canada, we just saw that. This backside system developing, we saw the heavy snow as we went through Friday evening over like western Oklahoma, North Texas. It's actually this little kind of blip on the vorticity maximum. And I'm going to follow this. I'm going to go backwards in time from like, this is Friday afternoon to like Friday morning and Thursday night. So I'm going to step this backwards. It's this little Chihuahuan shortwave. Now I call these little Chihuahuan shortwaves because this is the state of Mexico called Chihuahua. It's like kind of right here. It's got more of like a scraggly border, but trust me, that's Chihuahua there. It's a very high elevation, so we often get these like dry shortwaves that race across the southern U.S. and then kick off storms. If these come through in like February, March, and April, I get worried for like tornado outbreaks. In January, still a severe threat, potentially component to that on Friday that we'll have to watch, but not as concerning as it would be, I think, later in the year. And then finally, kind of putting this all together, that low tries to consolidate here by Saturday, midday, and snowfall now trying to form over Chicago, portions of Michigan, the upper Midwest. But because that low couldn't quite form, kind of developing here near Mississippi, those two short waves coming together over Canada, we couldn't quite get the consolidation between all those vorticity maximums. Eric mentioned this yesterday. They're just kind of mistimed. The tilt wasn't quite right. We don't get one of these big Midwest snowstorms. We have kind of the severe component through the south that we'll talk about in a second, but that snow doesn't really materialize till it just starts to get out of the area on Saturday evening up into Ontario and Quebec, where the snow amounts likely to be a little bit stronger. That system exits, as I mentioned, Sunday off the East Coast. We start next week pretty calm. Ridging developing over the west with warmer temperatures there, and then it's later in the week, I'll talk about this in a second, we start to get more inclement weather. Remember, so there's short waves kind of diving in out of Canada Wednesday through Friday, potentially returning snow and much colder air to the forecast for the central and the eastern U.S. I'll talk about that in a minute here. I want to mention those severe storm chances. We're looking at Cape. This is the what we call that convective available potential energy for those thunderstorms. Not a map we often show in January, but as I play this forecast through this evening, this is now midnight tonight. You can see some decent Cape values getting into central North Texas here, the Red River, the south. That's prompting the Storm Prediction Center. Let's see if we can pull this up here. For a marginal risk for that quarter here tonight, as I play this forward through tomorrow, let's take it out to Thursday, 6 p.m. See some of that instability getting up into like Arkansas, southern Missouri, through Louisiana. Storm Prediction Center highlighting that area. Marginal risk for severe storms on Friday, or Thursday, I should say, tomorrow. And then let's take this all the way through Friday. About 6 p.m., you'll notice that kind of corridor of best instability, more so over like Mississippi, maybe even getting into Alabama, Louisiana, overnight into midnight, maybe pushing a little bit further north near Tennessee into northwest Georgia, but kind of this corridor here late on Friday with a little bit better instability for storms. And as a result, let's jump over, look at the SPC. And they've highlighted that area as a slight risk, even here all the way out on Friday. So I'll have to watch for some severe storms, kind of consecutive days here through the Mid-South. We have the forecast for ECMWF snowfall. We'll play this forward through like the next 48 hours. Decent snowfall getting up toward like that foot critically in the Cascades, both in Washington and Oregon. It's good to see that there. It's an area that's missed out in some recent years, so I'd like to see better snowpack build in there. So you're just kind of scattering snow over the Rockies. We saw a lot of those kind of little winter weather advisories when we started this morning. That's prompting those there. And then, of course, let's get back to where we were. As we take this through, you'll notice that Thursday evening, that first system comes through eastern Nebraska, Omaha, portions of Iowa, southeast Minnesota, kind of southeast of Rochester, and then up through the kind of north woods. Not a strong snow swath here, maybe getting close to like a material accumulation of snow. A little bit stronger as we go through the evening and through Friday, a little bit further north. But it's really that next system has a little bit better access to cold air, maybe northern Illinois, looking through Detroit, looking at some snow accumulations, but not very much. And this takes us all the way through Sunday. Now the GFS is more bullish through like portions of Michigan. It wraps that snow up a little bit better. But despite those two lows coming through the Midwest in the middle to early part of January, just not seeing significant snowfall, given kind of those mistimed waves and all the warmth that we built into here, let alone kind of the warmer, top layer of the soil that we've warmed up here, maybe preventing some of those initial accumulations as well. We do see better accumulations here. North Texas, I mentioned that snow trying to form on the backside near the Oklahoma Panhandle. Little corridor in here that could get some decent snow pretty quickly as we go through the end of this week. Now, as I take this forecast out forward, remember those short waves that were sneaking out of Canada the end of next week? Those are going to try to lay down some heavier snowfall through the upper Midwest near the end of next week. I think the snowfall is going to jump around a bit, might even push into New England as we go through like next weekend, not this weekend. And there'll be more of a snow story to watch kind of as we go through like January 16th through the 21st. But like I said, quite at that point in this video here this morning. I want to show the GFS very quickly. It takes that initial wave. It actually shows a little bit more snowfall, maybe initially with that wave through Iowa and Wisconsin. I'll say the convective signal, that is the thunderstorm forecast from the GFS, a little bit stronger Friday evening. like northeast Mississippi, northern Alabama, like Chattanooga area. Maybe the GFS a little bit more bullish on those severe storms, but it struggles to wrap that snow up near like Chicago to Detroit. It actually pushes that snow line even up into like Saginaw, if not the northern portions of the lower peninsula there. It actually is a little bit stronger as it moves through there, but that quickly pushes out of the area. And just kind of contrasting the GFS snowfall accumulations, I'm gonna like make this valid just for Sunday. Greater snowfall amounts comparably for the lower peninsula of Michigan, kind of a decent snow swap initially on that Thursday system, but that's so narrow, it's hard to put too much stake into this, given how narrow that swath is through like north central Iowa into Wisconsin. By and large, missing out on more of a widespread snow event here, given the mistimed event. I want to touch on winds quickly before we dive into temperatures and then the long range in just a second here. There's those high winds this morning over Wyoming that we saw on the surface winds. If I jump back here, that's temperature as we go through this evening. That initial system Thursday, we're in some gusty winds through the southern plains into the Midwest, nothing too significant, maybe getting up near 50. And then it's that diving wave down the backside that's going to bring higher winds to the elevations of Southern California, the transverse ranges. You can see by Friday some stronger winds getting into the Midwest. And then still watching over here in Southern California, in the Southwest, some stronger winds. And then finally, as we go through the day, on Friday, those strong winds moving up into New England, Ontario, and Quebec. And then if you look down here, that kind of classic Santa Ana signature with these kind of little swaths of wind sneaking from the coast out into the Pacific, signifying these kind of offshore stronger wind events through Southern California and the Baja here. Again, high wind watch out for Southern California. We're not nearly as worried about wildfires, given all the moisture that we've had through Southern California, but maybe some gusty winds to end the week here, Thursday, Friday, particularly through Southern California. Have to keep an eye on that, just with some of the stronger wind gusts by themselves, maybe causing a little bit of damage. If we look at temperatures here early in the week, I'm starting with minimum temperatures. Just look how warm we are. Starting this morning on Wednesday, I mean, widespread 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s across much of the continental U.S. To get even down into like the 20s, you have to go all the way up near the border. That continues on Thursday and Friday with those lows sneaking through, all the cloud cover, kind of keeping those overnight lows up through the eastern continental U.S. But we're bringing the temperatures down on the backside, that kind of dark blue color that we saw way over here in San Francisco, through that area, even like Monterey. That was those cold wind warnings or extreme cold watches or warnings. I can't remember what was that deep cold color. That's not one we see. Extreme cold watch, that's right, that we're seeing for Central California. And if I play this forecast forward, you can see why 40, 35 down through the Central Valley of California on Friday. That continues on Saturday morning, warm for the eastern U.S. and not seeing a widespread cool down, save for portions of the southeast coast, as that low kind of sneaks through early next week and leaves cold air on the backside of it. We're already warming up on the backside of the system by Tuesday of next week. If we look at daytime high temperatures, warmth here 60s this morning for the Central Plains. Looking at widespread 50s, 60s, and 70s, kind of beyond that in eastern continental U.S. To get into the 30s, you have to go up to like Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, or portions of New England. Take that forecast through Thursday, Friday. See that cold front across the western U.S., bringing those daytime highs down, but staying warm through Saturday through much of the eastern U.S. The most anomalous warmth shifting off into the Carolinas and the mid-Atlantic as that low moves to the east. With that cold front moving through on Sunday, we bring those temperatures down on the backside. Mentioned that kind of frost freeze risk across the southeast, but already warming back up across the northern plains by Sunday. And that continues early next week before that pattern flip that I talked about. Now, I want to dive into that pattern flip at this point in the video here. We've been talking about this, Eric and I, that the MJO has not been very active here as we've ended December and gone into early January. And that's made the long-term forecast through like the middle to latter part of January, even into February, somewhat complicated. Now, we do have the blessing this week that the MJO is starting to wake up a bit. You can see that here in the phase diagram that we've been in null space for the last 20 days or so, maybe longer, but finally sneaking out of that into phase 6 or phase 7 here. So decent agreement between the models of getting into those phases. Now, when I say the MJO getting into phase 6 or 7, we're so often like looking at this plot and trying to infer things. Let's just go look at where we're at now. So we're kind of still in null space. That is not a coherent MJO signal. And where we're often looking for the MJO is frankly over in the West Pacific or the East Indian Ocean, kind of near Indonesia. So I thought I'd just pull up the infrared satellite for that area this morning. Let's see if we can make that a little bit bigger. This is using the Himawari. It's a Japanese satellite. It was launched in 2016. Kind of keeps an eye in this area of the world. It's good for typhoons, cyclones over in the Pacific. And we can see over Indonesia, right here, here's Australia in the West Pacific. There's not much thunderstorm activity here right now. Now, there tends to be more at night. Obviously, daytime here, waking up this morning. This thunderstorm activity tends to increase kind of in the evening or nighttime areas. So that is something we'll have to take into account. But by and large, not much thunderstorm activity right now. This can be a lot more active this time of year than it is right now. We only see like a cluster here, maybe one way over here south of Hawaii, which we can barely make out there. But no major thunderstorm activity currently. Now, the forecast from the ECMWF here is that that's going to change. We're going to get more obvious signal of thunderstorm activity over in phase 6 and 7, which is like, right here. Should be somewhere in this corridor here, 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, like that. Now, we can look at this in the GFS forecast. Actually, maybe jump this over to the ECMWF because it's the same one we were looking at on that phase diagram. If I make this valid as of this morning, let's do kind of Wednesday. You can see decent signal that the MJO should be kind of sparking up in this area here. We didn't really see it here this morning looking at it. As we play this forward, that activity expected to decrease here north of Australia. Maybe even some cyclone activity to keep an eye on. And that picks up here at the end of this week. Maybe dies down a bit by this weekend. And we're looking at rising air in this part of the world to try to get as a proxy for increased thunderstorm development here. And then by early next week, you'll notice that shifts to the east of it. That's that kind of phase 6 to 7 transition that we're watching. And then by the end of the week, a much better signal here in the West Pacific, like phase 7 for increased thunderstorm activity over that quarter here. So more phase 7 as we get out into the end of January. And that sticks around, even starts to push like more anomalously, maybe toward phase 8 as you get a little bit further out. But that is a very clear kind of phase 7 getting into phase 8 signal. A lot of sinking air over the Indian Ocean here. And that kind of dipole of sinking air here, rising air here, that is kind of critical for that increased MJO magnitude that we're seeing in that phase diagram. You can kind of see that whole scenario trying to play out here. So this gives us a little bit of a better signal of where we might be going in the forecast. And what we're translating this with respect to the continental U.S. is how's it going to affect the North Pacific jet stream? Because right now, if we go look at the North Pacific jet stream valid as of this morning, kind of drew that there's not much going on. We see it kind of zonally extended east of Okinawa, heading out north of Hawaii. There's this little ridge here. We talked about that kind of persistent ridge near Alaska this year as we went through New Year's. But beyond that, it just kind of, it's kind of zonal through the continental U.S. We have these cutoff flows sneaking through the Midwest. Those are obviously impacting our weather, but we're not seeing these significant, like well-timed short waves powering through, causing these more widespread winter-like events that can cause so much travel disruption in the middle of January, like we typically expect this time of year. Instead, we got some like winter weather advisories and fog advisories. Now, if I play this forecast forward, notice this jet stream strengthening here at the end of this week, east of Japan. That's that extra thunderstorm activity that was forecast from the ECMWF and the GFS for that matter. As I go into early next week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, notice the jet stream, it's actually starting to extend equatorward or this way. So I'm kind of drawing this here east of Japan and now almost touching like Kauai, near Hawaii. If I take this forecast back 5 days to the present day, that's staying well north of that area here. But as we go out into next week, it's starting to push further south, and that's prompting a much better breakdown into this large ridge west of California across the eastern Pacific. And what goes up has to come down, and so we're seeing much better long wave trough signal here over the central and eastern U.S., prompting the pattern change late next week, Thursday into Friday, of much colder air, snow chances for the eastern U.S., and a kind of axis or a source region for that Canadian cold air, that Arctic air, to push from the kind of coldest reaches of the planet right now further into the eastern U.S., and that potential increasing as we go through maybe the end of January with that MJO signal changing. We can see this pretty clearly in the CPC, their long-range outlook. Warmer for the west, closer to the influence of that ridge that's going to be developing from the 14th throughout the 20th, and better chances for more seasonal return to more winter-like temperatures for the central and eastern part of the country versus what we saw here, this week with so much warmer air for that part of the country. I see this too, just looking at the call these like the postage stamps for temperatures. On the left, these are the next 5 days. All the models, the ECMWF, the GFS, and the AIFS. Much warmer for the central and eastern U.S. Full agreement there. Colder for like the far western U.S. As we go through this week and through this weekend, warmer for still much of the continental U.S. A little bit of temperature swings kind of embedded in this, but largely leaning on the warm side. And it's not till 10 to 15 days, the rightmost panel here, we start to see that cold air, the source region out of northern Canada, spreading that cold air back into the central and the eastern U.S., setting up the potential for some of these Arctic air outbreaks as we go through the end of the month. So that's kind of connecting that story together. And we talked about this, even earlier this month, where looking at historically phase 6 or 7 at the end of January, pick on phase 7, for example, near the middle to end of January, tends to support ridging in the west and downstream troughing in the eastern U.S. Kind of see that there, if not more so, ridging over the western U.S. as we go through the end of January with phase 7 because of that MJO kind of sparking up more so in the western Pacific. So decent support from a number of different angles here that for the eastern U.S. we're looking colder, for the western U.S. we're looking warmer and drier through the end of January, maybe even the beginning of February. And let's look at one more thing here. I wanted to pull up because we are in La Niña. Phase 6 La Niña in January tends to promote ridging over the western U.S. That lines up with what we're seeing here over the next kind of 7 to 10 days. And then if we take that out a little bit further and go phase 7 in January, that ridge gets more amplified and provides that corridor for cold air to come out of Canada into the Midwest U.S. See this in the weeklies too. If we look at the next 7 days of precipitation from the ECMWF long range, warm across much of the eastern U.S., and that starts to break down the 18th through the 25th, all the way out through like the 22nd through the 29th of January, that corridor of cold air through the end of the month. It actually advertises a brief warm-up for the plains in the middle part of the country in early February, but kind of shifts us back into that cold air. I don't want to read too much into the kind of very long-range part of that forecast, but what I really wanted to showcase was that pattern flip to colder air in that area here. All right, I wanted to touch on, I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, that I was going to kind of extend Eric's analog discussion a little bit. So Eric brought up a lot of years yesterday in his analog package, looking at these transitions from La Niña quickly into an El Nino. And I think I took a screenshot to kind of compare all those years that he plugged in. So there's that screenshot. So just quickly, I'll point out some of these like 23, 18, 14, 09, all the way back to like 1963. And for the sake of trying to consider where we might be going in 2026, my eyes just wanted to pull out what are the like most concerning of these analog years, and let's compare that to where we're at now this year in January of 2026. And I just quickly pulled over the last 30 years, 2023, because that year started out with significant drought concern. It was enough to move the markets considerably. We ended up getting kind of just-in-time rainfall at the end of June and through the end of July in the Midwest. We had a decent year for growing corn in a number of areas in 2023, but the drought was significant enough to be, a story for marketing, and made news nationally that year. I also pulled out 2002 because of a lot of the heat that year and the suppressed yields, and then 1991, which was almost kind of the same thing, a lot of depressed yields through the middle part of the country. So those are the 3 years in this analog package that I picked out. I excluded kind of my search as we went into like the 70s and the 60s. I wanted to pick out years that were a little bit easier to compare with where sea surface temperatures are now currently in 2026. So again, 02, 1991, and 2023. And when I did that, pulled up an analog for June through August that looked like this for precipitation. So 2023, 02, 91. And we saw less precipitation all the way from Nebraska, eastern Kansas. Pretty much, if you had to draw the Corn Belt, save for the northern Corn Belt, this area is still really productive. But certainly if you're well below average in a lot of these areas here, you're going to suppress the crop even through like the southern Mississippi Valley, June through August. So seeing that kind of concerning scenario in only those 3 analogs. There's still plenty of good years, by the way, in this analog, like 2014, 2018, even 09. If we plug in these 3 years into sea surface temperatures historically to get a picture of where we were at and the oceans on the eve of the growing season. So I picked May, just before we went into summer. And remember, Eric picked out this package of analog years because they were years where we started out in La Niña in January and quickly moved into El Nino through the growing season. And so we see in May, we already had that El Nino signature starting to develop, maybe right at the kind of precipice of being in El Nino with these warmer ocean temperatures stretching across the equator from Peru, that kind of classic look. Well, we also see here much colder water off of California and the Baja. It's kind of almost negative PMM, negative PDO signature with the warm water north of Hawaii and cold water bracketing around it. We also saw, if we go over here into the Indian Ocean, well, maybe a negative Indian Ocean dipole, cold west, a little bit warmer east. That's not super clear to me. A little bit of cold water here near the Philippines, kind of stretching west of Hawaii. I'm trying to pull out things I can compare to where we might be this year. Now, the only main thing I see here is that very cold water here, that starting or burgeoning El Nino, the equator, and then that warm water north of Hawaii, maybe a little bit of cooler water here over in like the West Pacific, just given it's a little bit warmer here, like in the central West Pacific. Those are the only things that stand out to me. Now, if I compare that to where we are now, at least January, obviously we could change going toward May. Well, obviously we have to start out in a La Nina and get into an El Nino by May, but look at the waters off of California and the Baja. We're warm here. We're very warm. Now, we're warm north of Hawaii, but we don't see that kind of cooler signature stretching west of Hawaii toward the West Pacific. And over in the Indian Ocean, we did have that negative Indian Ocean dipole, but it's been deteriorating. It's getting back almost toward neutral now, just a little bit colder in the west versus the east. So I don't see a huge, similarity between these concerning Mays, so to speak, with where we're at now. Now, obviously, between January and May, this could change, but I'm pretty skeptical we're just going to crater these temperatures off the coast of California here without kind of a bigger change in the atmosphere at this point. Now, if El Nino's going to strengthen between now and then, that obviously, we're going to see some changes in sea surface temperatures here, but I don't think that would support such a rapid cooling off of the waters in these kind of areas here to make us similar by this point in the early part of the growing season. Now, Eric also pulled up these analogs for spring, April to June, the same analog package, and they were drier in a lot of the areas here. Plenty of good years in here. So if we started dry, we ended up finishing the year wet in a lot of these years that we pulled up. And I was kind of curious to see that drier signal. And we've seen that in a lot of our, I think, better analogs to where we're at now this year. And so I went and pulled up kind of maybe the best one with respect to sea surface temperatures now. March through May of 2018. 2018 has come up time and again this year, both 17 in December and then transitioning 18 in January and February. And sure enough, March through May, we were dry throughout the plains and parts of the Midwest through spring of that growing season. And we ended up transitioning through summer into wet, through those same growing regions. Very different from 2023, 1991, and 2002, comparing it to 2018. Now, 2018 sea surface temperatures in January, let's do January 7th when I'm recording this. If I pull those up, man, it's just so much more similar to where we're at now. And so if I pull that up and compare, here's currently January 5th compared to January 7th, 2026, 2018. I mean, these are, I don't want to say a spitting image, but very, very similar between the two. The only difference I can really see is that negative Indian Ocean dipole is hanging on a bit longer in 2018 and maybe a little bit more warmth this year in the North Pacific. But you don't see that cold water off the coast of California, warm in both cases. And this is starting to set up, I think, in the long range for a better narrative, spring dryness, but less drought concern than summer. That's just how I read it right now. I'll leave it there today. We'll continue to talk about this discussion moving forward. Next week, I want to focus more on where we're going with respect to west precipitation, with respect to this pattern change. And Eric will talk with you all on Friday. I'll be with you one more day this week, tomorrow on Thursday. Thanks for watching.